Thank you, Natasha. That was really insightful. It's wonderful to hear your experience and your breadth of understanding from those two different contexts, as well as I'm sure many other contexts that you've been highly involved in. You spoke about the embeddedness in the local context and some of the challenges, particularly with that Al-Shabaab example of the way that challenges can operate outside of those territorial constructs and those traditional notions of the nation states and governance as we may understand them. What do you see as the potential role of Rotary in supporting peace efforts, being a non-government organisation that does have links in many parts of the world in a local context, but also has that overarching global structure?
I think that's a great question. There's two areas that really stand out for me. One is your global presence, so that you do just already have an ability to link across global boundaries. There is a Rotary family that, for me, as someone who's relatively new to getting to know you, it's genuinely there. It's not being talked about as the Rotary family. You feel it. You meet people, say that you've had a connection with Rotary, and they will talk to you about all of their Rotary colleagues from across the world. So you have this innate ability not to only see the world through the nation state lens. It's something that I think organizations like the UN struggle with, because they are made up of individual member states, and we then tend to go back to that building block. Rotary has been able to build beyond that. And the second piece that really strikes me is when I look at who do I deal with in Somalia at the moment. Yes, absolutely, the federal government of Somalia is massively important, but the private sector cannot be underestimated in any country in terms of its leadership role. So if I look at the ability, the revenue raising ability of the Somali government is around $300 million a year. There are multiple Somali companies that have multi-million, billion-dollar turnovers. These guys are influencers, they're controlling the country, they are able to provide the leadership and connection across all sorts of groups. Somalia for 30 years has had one of the most reliable mobile network connections that you can find anywhere in the world, and it's affordable. Virtually every Somali has a mobile phone and can completely do their banking on that phone. This part of the community, which is not necessarily who the technocrats and functionaries think of, is incredibly powerful across the world. When you go and you sit in the international community in Mogadishu or Kabul, you are totally surrounded by functionaries. They may be uniformed, they may not, but they look for these very traditional government constructs to connect with. Rotary is so much more than that. You are a private sector, private civil society organization, and the sorts of things that you can teach us in how to connect on that basis, I think, is really important.
Thank you. We've got a number of other questions that are coming through for you, so I hope you're ready for them. We have another question following up on your discussion around bans and sanctions, and particularly around the role of these and whether or not they're the best way whether or not restricting weapons supply is the best way to try and create peace, and particularly in the context of Yemen at the moment, but perhaps other contexts as well.
There is no single solution to any of these problems, any of these challenges, but a free flow of weapons is probably not something that we want to encourage. By having some power of control with governments on the use of force, I think there are definite advantages with that. Is the sanctions system able to really cover all of the issues involved? No, of course it's not. It is, in my context, connected to the Security Council. If we look at who sells weapons around the world, there are always significant members of the Security Council involved in that. There are always members of the international community. It's a huge business. But we do interdict a lot of weapons coming in and out of the countries. Yemen and Somalia, for us, one is in the Middle East, one is in Africa. For the people, there's a slightly damp border in between them. Those communities move backwards and forwards all the time. Between us and the Yemen panel, we are involved in a lot of smuggling of weapons that come from places like Iran, that come from border areas, and a lot of those weapons are stopped. Now, does that mean that major bombing campaigns won't go on from other sources? No, but it does restrict the kind of damage that can be caused. I think there's probably an even bigger piece if we start looking at IED components. The damage that's caused to civilian populations by IEDs and these uncontrolled explosions is something that we really can reduce and restrict, and that's worth pursuing, but never going to be enough on its own.
Thank you. We have another question specific to Afghanistan and around the withdrawal of troops that's been announced from Afghanistan. Do you feel that there's enough being done to protect women's and human rights, minority rights in that process, and also to address the power dynamics in establishing peace, but a peace that is based on justice?
Yeah, this is always the million-dollar question, and there will have to be sacrifices in every part of this. Unfortunately, the sacrifices that tend not to be made are with the elites and the traditional power bases, and that's where we really need to find ways to give a voice to a real cross-section of society. It's an interesting dynamic. There is always a point where international troops become more of a catalyst to conflict than an ability to put pressure on, to degrade the terrorist insurgency movements. I would have said it's high time the internationals were not there. The process of how do you do that drawdown is a really difficult one, and you'll never get it entirely right. For me, the timing now, is there a political component? Yes, of course there is. There always is. But at the same time, 20 years of having major international forces in Afghanistan has not led to a solution in the sort of levels that we would like. There has been progress, but we now have to find other ways to support the community voice, to support education, to support women's rights, that is not solely based on having a large military presence. There will be individuals that suffer. There would be individuals that suffer if the troops remain. And that's the balance that we need to try and find. It's not a good answer, I know, sorry.
It is a difficult question. We have a specific question for young professionals. Do you have any advice for young professionals in peace building or state building missions at the moment?
Look, if there's anybody there who's keen to get involved in this work, my first piece of advice is just dive in and do it. It's the most rewarding kind of work that you can be involved in. Reach out to everybody individually that you can find. I have a lot of people reach out, and I'm always happy to talk about what opportunities there are. And educate yourself as much as you can. I said in my introduction that I think one of my advantages is I don't have a totally classic entree into the business. That's much harder for the younger professionals. There is a competition that seems to require 3 master's degrees and 5 fluent languages. But I don't think that's what makes you a good professional. What makes you a good professional is being able to engage with people, being able to understand history, really being able to think. And the more that you can spend time doing that, I think you can then also prove yourself and find opportunities to get in.
Thank you. I think Murray has a question next.
Thanks, Jess. Natasha, you spoke about when you arrived in Somalia that you discovered there was a real need to build relationships with neighbouring countries. We've had a bit of discussion over the past 2 days about the importance of collaboration and connectivity. I'm just wondering how you and the UN went about rebuilding those relationships with the countries, and what techniques did you use to do that?
Again, Murray, to me, it's always trying to understand what's going to be the catch to bring people in. What is Kenya and Ethiopia going to see as the advantage of our work? There will be things they want us to do that I will not agree with, but there's always going to be some commonalities simply because the challenges are common. And for those countries, we were lucky in that it was quite simple. There has not been the kind of international focus on Al-Shabaab and Daesh in that region that I've seen in other parts of the world. So if I go to Afghanistan, I go to Syria, I go even to places like Libya, and I want to understand who the personalities and the threat of the terrorist or insurgent groups are, the intelligence collect has been done. In Somalia, it hasn't. It's really been, I think, a Western piece to say this is a problem contained inside Somalia. If we can keep it contained, it doesn't result in major attacks against outside countries. It doesn't result in major refugee flows to Europe. It's okay. Clearly, if you're Kenya and Ethiopia, it's not okay, and that is not the reality of what's happening. So it's helping to articulate for them what the real challenges are. And a lot of that just means sitting and talking to people, understanding their concerns, bringing that together, starting to find what are the at least symbolic concrete actions that you can put in place to begin with. And for us, it was the designation of 3 senior Al-Shabaab leaders who were not currently on the sanctions list, 2 very senior leaders inside the country, and 1 who was leading operations in Kenya. Again, getting that international focus on the problem. So it's this combination of, okay, what can I understand? What can I see as the commonalities? And then what concretely can I start to do about the problem? And those designations and starting to work on the financial challenges. Because again, this regional aspect, Nairobi is the financial center of the Horn of Africa. So anything that's happening in the formal financial sector that is being controlled by the likes of Shabaab is impacting on all of the neighboring countries. So that trying to make that combination of, yes, I am listening, I am talking, I am understanding, and I'm going to do something about it.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you. I have one last question, bringing together your discussion around the importance of collaboration and co-design to find solutions, embedding in local contexts, and also finding the ways that different viewpoints can be considered in finding a lasting solution. What would your advice be for Australia in the Australian context as we work towards reconciliation with our Indigenous communities and Indigenous nations, and face past and present injustices through that to actually build a collective future moving forward?
I think Australia's made a couple of really significant steps in that we've actually started to acknowledge that there's an issue, and it was a long time before that became part of the general parlance. Really being able to be upfront and direct that, hey, this isn't working, we got this wrong, we need to find a better way forward, and starting to do that at these elite political levels and at the community level. The thing, because I've not lived in Australia for quite some time, but to start to see an acknowledgement of our heritage, a change in postal codes that reflect Indigenous names, and a standard acknowledgement of country when we come together. All of those things that when I was a kid, people would have scoffed at. All of that starts to build a base where we're open to have the conversations. And it's really interesting for me as an Australian outside of the country. I really want to examine and to learn how do I better express my pride in the history of Australia and all of that 40,000 year history, and do it in a way that doesn't in any way take take credit away from the part of the community that really is that history, but to become part of acknowledging, hey, this is an amazing country that we come from. Look at everything that's been there for so long. And to be able to get to a point where that's just an innate part of being Australian, which I don't think it's easy to know how to express some of those prides and some of those values, whilst at the same time we're going through a process to reconcile with all of the negatives of the past as well.
Thank you. I think you articulate that very eloquently, that journey that we're all on in terms of understanding and coming to terms with and expressing our shared history. That brings to a close our Q&A session. Unfortunately, Jose Ramos Horta wasn't able to join us, unfortunately, but thank you so much, Natasha. It's been wonderful speaking with you.